Okay, so let's take a look at perception part 2. A fool sees not the same tree that the wise man sees. Okay, so here's what I was talking about. We're going to look a little bit about the mechanics, first, of perception, of vision in our perception. When you look at something, what actually appears on your retina are two small inverted two-dimensional images. Yet without any conscious effort, you see one life-size, non-inverted image of the three-dimensional world. So this is what's actually happening. Your eyeball is actually a flipped image. Our eyes has an inverted image, and our brain flips it around, which was, I think, part of that experiment, how that kind of worked. So here's the little bit of biology that I have for you. If you think of the eye as a camera with the cornea behaving very much like a lens cover, rays of light will be bent by the pupil around a iris. The iris and the pupil act like the aperture of a camera. They open and close to direct and bend the light. So here you can see your pupil right in here, and it basically lenses or magnifies and modifies the light to bend it and shoot it back to your optic areas here and your retina areas at the back of your eye to receive the light. Now, the back of that eye, the retina, acts very much like the film of a camera. It reacts to the light that strikes it. So it has these nerve cells that line up along the back here. So there's lots of nerves, and they will be affected by the light energy touching it, and it will translate that light energy into electrical impulses along the nerve. Okay? Those electrical impulses will then travel up to your brain to be interpreted as what it sees. So basically, light is directed by the front of your eye. So the front of your eye focuses the light. The back of the eye reacts to the light by generating electricity. So when light hits the back of your eye, it generates electricity, which then goes up to your brain. And that's really how it works. Okay? It's very much like a camera. A camera does the same thing. The lens at the front changes and magnifies the light, and the film on an old camera, when it's struck by the light, will react chemically to produce the image that we see on a photograph. Okay? And then there's some more stuff in there. Again, I'm not a biology teacher, but there's the macula, right? And all these components of the eye will essentially function to produce electrical impulses that your brain will then interpret into imagery. Okay? So now let's look at the ear. The ear works slightly different. It works, well, quite a bit differently. There's the inner ear, the outer ear, and the middle ear. Okay? Sound waves will enter your ear through a canal, through a cave, so to speak. Okay? Those will then go towards the sort of mechanics of how the ear works, which you may have heard again is this thing called the eardrum. There's this drum, which is essentially just like the cover of a drum. It's a membrane that will vibrate when sound hits it. It will then move something called the hammer, which is just another piece of your ear that's attached to the drum. Okay? So the eardrum vibrates. The vibrations move on to the hammer. The hammer strikes something called the anvil. You can kind of guess where they come up with those words. But it strikes another piece. So there's this drum that vibrates. It moves a hammer, which touches another thing. And that touches something called the stirrup. So it's basically passing vibrations along. So vibrations are passed from the drum to the hammer to the anvil to the stirrup. And those things are all named based on their shape once they were discovered. And then those vibrations pass through to the inner ear along something called the cochlea, which is shaped very much like a shell. And it's attached to these fibers of nerve again. So the nerve fibers will generate electricity to pass along to the brain. The brain will then interpret that electricity into sound. Okay? So very much like the eyeball, it's got some mechanical pieces that turn then into electrical pieces which travel along our nerves to generate within our brain what we interpret. So just like I talked about in the previous presentation, the outside world and the stimuli of the outside world is turned into, eventually, an electrical signal that comes to your brain, and what your brain does with it is important. Now the nose, the mechanics of the nose, is basically you have two large passages which the air comes in and out. You have a septum, and you have four sinus cavities, okay? The sinus cavities are above, below, and behind your eyes, so they're quite deep cavities. Now, the nose has multiple functions. It's a breathing apparatus, but it's also a smelling and a tasting apparatus. So the air itself that you breathe is filled with molecules, okay? Those molecules will attach to the cilia, okay? The cilia are the little nose hairs that you have, and there's the ones you can obviously see on the outside, and then there's obviously lots on the inside as well. The function of the cilia is to trap those molecules, okay? And those molecules aren't just air. There's dust, there's dirt, there's lots of stuff in there. If you slice an apple in half and breathe in its scent, what's happening is apple molecules are going in your nose and getting attached to the cilia, okay? When this happens, the olfactory receptor neurons attached to the cilia are activated, again, sending nerve signals to your brain that allow you to identify this smell as an apple, okay? The way taste works is you have these things called taste buds located at the top or the back, depending on your perspective, of the tongue, okay? And these receptor cells, again, generate nerve endings that will go through your palate, through your throat. The tongue has the most of them, but there are also taste receptors in your throat as well. And then little brush-like things will, again, brush and taste and stuff like that through nerve endings. So it's, again, very similar mechanics here, that there are little sensors in your tongue, little sensors in your nose, and little sensors at the back of your eye and deep inside your ear that will send electrical signals to your brain, okay? This also works with your skin, right? Your skin also has those nerve endings that will send the electrical signals, generating our five senses. So there's a little bit of the mechanics of it, okay? But it's not also as simple as that. There is an interplay of the senses themselves, right? A classic example of that is the interplay of smell and taste. That when we smell something and we taste it, both senses are kind of working at the same time. Okay, I told you the story about my grandmother who now has, in her late 90s, has lost her sense of taste. Now, I don't know if that's actually true. It's possible that she still has her sense of taste, but her brain might not be interpreting the signals as well anymore. So she can't tell the difference between things she eats because it's just not, registering with her brain at this point. It's also possible that some other sense interaction is happening there. But sense of smell and sense of taste are clearly very, very closely related. Okay. Our sense of taste is also related to this thing called the gustatory cortex, a surface of the brain near the back which processes taste inputs. It's located next to the parts of the brain which control chewing and swallowing. Now here's an interesting fact. About 25% of world population are what are called super tasters. They have a heightened sense of taste, a lot stronger than your average person. Okay? One of you in here might very well be a super taster. And this is just because they have a greater density of taste buds. And also, they have a slightly different brain processing technique that allows them to taste at a much higher level than the rest of us. I don't think I'm a super taster. But interestingly enough, those super tasters might not like as many foods as we do because they taste them differently than we do. They taste them more strongly than we do. So it's interesting when you say to someone like, hey, try this is awesome. And they say, oh, I don't want to try it. And then they try it and they say, oh, I don't like it. It might be because they are completely tasting it in a different way than you are, because they have a different concentration of taste buds, and they might just interpret the taste a different way. like I said before, touch is again one that's related to all kinds of stuff, because again, with touch, we are also incorporating our sense of smell and hearing and other things in there as well. But yeah, touch is also something that works on nerve endings that access the brain. There's some technical details on here, like the somatosensory cortex and the postcentral gyrus or iris. Some very technical. I wish someone like Ms. Blankenberg was here to explain that to you. But again, it's just basically a lot of mechanics there that are affecting our senses. But it's kind of a blurry line when we say we have 5 distinctive senses. They kind of are more like overlapping circles, right? Like taste and touch and taste and smell. It's almost like we have kind of one sense that we're incorporating 5 different components into. That's maybe another way you could look at senses. Touch is one of our most primitive senses, okay? We kind of had touch before we had some of the others. Eyesight evolved, hearing evolved, taste evolved. But touch was kind of one of our first, right? If you think back to like very simple organisms, they have that sense of touch in the sense that they can identify when some other creature is beside them or some other object is beside them. When you think about just bacteria floating around in a bowl, they can at least sort of understand when they're touching something, even though they don't have a brain at that point. They can react to it. And animals use touch, just like us, to navigate environments, okay? So in humans, the sense of touch, or the somatosensory cortex, is devoted to processing touch signals, absolutely. But most of those touch signals, about 90%, come from your hands and your face, okay? Sure, we can sense, like I can sense this thing when I touch it with my leg. But most of our sense of touch comes from our hands and face. That's the way we've evolved. And I don't think most of us would disagree with that when you're going to touch, if I say touch this, you're most likely going to touch it with your hand or your face. Mostly your hand, depending on what it is. Okay, so these are what are called sensory hotspots, right? So they have that real high sensory perception there. Okay, this is Helen Keller's quote. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
I've been learning from the chef how to do all the pastry and everything.
Yep.
And when you're testing things like chocolate or different things that need to be a specific temperature, they say that the best place to test is right above your lip, because that's the most sensitive part, where you can sense the temperature.
Does it have a high concentration of taste buds there?
I'm not sure.
Should look into that. That's a great point. Is anyone in here taking biology right now? Okay, so we should investigate that question. Why is it that the top of the lip is the most sensitive area? I will give a prize to anyone who can come up with an answer for next class. A crappy prize, but a prize nonetheless. Okay. Helen Keller, you guys know who Helen Keller is? Who's Helen Keller? She can't see or hear, right? So she was a lady who couldn't see or hear, and was essentially in a time where she was, as a disabled person, sort of put away, but was taught to communicate through touch, okay? And so she's got an amazing story if you ever haven't really researched that. But the greater calamity that can befall people is not that they should be blind, but rather that they have eyes and fail to see. So more of a deeper philosophical point there, but interesting coming from her, really has a strong meaning for me. Okay. So now we'll step away from the mechanics a little bit and let's look at the role of the unconscious in this. So according to psychologists, many of the way we interpret our senses happens at an unconscious level. In other words, we don't have to think too much about what our senses is providing to us. Okay? Here I write up about the idea with the glasses and how it inverted the world. So that when the subjects were asked to wear glasses that inverted their image of the world, for the first few days they were completely disoriented because the world was upside down. But after a few days, their brain fixed the problem. Even though they were forced to wear glasses that flipped the world around, their brain saw it right side up again. When the experiment ended and they took the glasses off, all of a sudden the world was upside down again, even though they weren't wearing these glasses. And it took them a few more days until their brains fixed the problem. So it's interesting what our brains can do with sensory input without us even thinking too much about it, without us engaging like we did last time in the optical illusions. It just happens. Now, when you look in the mirror in the bathroom, the mirror is about half the size of your head, but when you stumble out of the bed in the morning, you don't get this, like if you have a really small, you look in the mirror, it's shrunk the size of your head, but you don't freak out when you see that in the mirror and go, oh my God, my head shrunk it in the night. It looks the same size to you that it should look. You don't think about that, it just happens automatically. Even young children, when they first see the mirror, even dogs, or, well, actually there's something called the mirror test that tests animals, and certain animals don't actually identify themselves in the mirror. There's only a few animals that actually do. Chimpanzees and higher order primates. Dogs have been known to see themselves in the mirror. They often see another dog in the mirror. They don't see themselves in the mirror. So they kind of fail what's called the mirror test. Can you think of another animal that has passed the mirror test? So when they look in the mirror, they know that's them and not another animal. Just take a guess. Cats, no, cats fail the mirror test. Dolphins is correct. Dolphins pass the mirror test. Yeah. Dolphins and chimps are the two famous ones that automatically know they're looking at themselves and not another dolphin or another dog. Cats see the mirror, they often see another cat, right? So anyways, that's beside the point. So that idea of vision, the mechanics that we just looked at, is something that we unconsciously just interpret. We don't just see blobs of color, right? We have trained our brains to instantly identify all the objects within our vision sites there. We see the world as familiar objects. We've put them into categories even. We go, well, that's a person, and that's a desk, and that's a giraffe. We create categories in our brain and instantly take the input and just say, oh, I'll put that over here in the desk box, and I'll put this over here in the person box, and I'll put that one over there in the giraffe box. And it works for us. Categorizing stuff works for us. And it's created in our brain a sort of process that we don't even have to think about. It just happens. Right? You look at this, you go stool. Right? You look at that, you say chair. You don't have to work too hard at it. It just happens. There is a condition, though, a form of brain damage known as visual agnosia or agnosia, which the poor souls who have experienced this lose the ability to do this. They lose the unconscious ability to actually interpret what they see. So they have vision, they just have no idea what they're looking at because that part of their brain has been damaged. And so the inputs are still happening. They're still seeing color. They just have no idea how to interpret it. They can't put it into those categories. Yes? Mm-hmm. You may have had some version of that. You could see, but you didn't know what you were looking at.
My friends were saying, like, why are you opening your eyes like that wide? It's because I was looking at things, but I was not like processing it.
Wow, that's amazing. Was it frightening? I would imagine, or disorienting, if nothing else.
I got unconscious a bit.
Oh, so you passed out again? Oh, okay. But you have memory of that, though, right? You have memory of what you saw at that time, and was it just light and?
Well, like, I would say 5% of what I was seeing was going through my brain, so I was like still looking at things. Like if someone were to punch me, then I would still dodge it.
Right.
Like some of it was getting processed, but it wasn't as detailed as.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of blurry and sort of whooshing together, kind of thing.
It's not blurry. It's like really weird.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I think it's hard for us to understand that experience because our brain, like I said, just does this so naturally. It so naturally can just categorize stuff and take the data that we're receiving from our senses and just interpret it. So.
Where does sleepwalking fit into all this?
Don't know. I'm not sure. Or dreaming. How does dreaming fit into this?
I mean, I sleepwalk a lot, and I remember like dreaming. My senses don't see things the same way they are. I see different things in my sleepwalk.
I don't know, but it strengthens that point that the brain is a big part of this thing called the senses, right? That this idea that just there's this world out there that we see is just one part of the equation. What we're actually pulling in and then what we do with it once it gets to the brain is a super important thing. And from a, if we get really philosophical, is Mr. Evans' dream reality? And is he dreaming now, right? Like, is this the dream and was that the reality, right? Like, which is which, right? If it's just electrical interpretation, which is kind of the basis of that movie, The Matrix, right? If they plug into that electrical part of your brain, they can create a reality there, theoretically. Well, who's to say that's not reality versus what our eyeballs are pulling in? Crazy, right? I mean, that's a very philosophical position. I mean, you think about the eyesight itself, right? We are limited in what we can see with our eyesight. We have a spectrum of light that we can see. But there are spectrums, I mean, the X-ray spectrum, beyond what we can see. Well, let's say that huge spectrum of light opened up to us, and we could see stuff that we can't see now. Could there be something in this room that now would be part of our reality that we just can't see? Or same with hearing or smell. I mean, dogs, as you know, have an incredibly much stronger sense of smell than we do. So their reality in the world is got to be different than ours because their sense of smell is so much stronger and their eyesight is weaker, right? Okay. So let's talk about selectivity of perception. We talked a little bit about this before. But apart from these visual illusions, we are selective in what we perceive, okay? The example I gave last time with the air conditioner fan, right? I mean, you choose to hear it or you choose not to. You are making a selective choice there. And the fact is we have to do that. Otherwise, our brains would overload. If we tried to be aware of everything in this room, and I got a lot of stimuli up in the room, a lot of visual stimuli, we would overload. We just can't do it. We have to make that selection. So what allows us to make that selection? What is important for us to perceive? What engages our attention, right? When we watched that video last time of the moonwalking bear, right, you chose to not engage in that image until you watched the second time through. So we apply our own filters to our perception, okay? Some of it is intensity, right? If all of a sudden you heard someone screaming in the hallway, that would probably get your attention because of the intensity of that particular stimuli, okay? You also are filtered by your mood, right? If you're in a good mood when you're walking to school, you might notice all the beautiful imagery around you. If you're in a bad mood, you might totally filter that stuff out. Even though it's a beautiful day, you might be in just a crappy mood walking to school, and you're just ignoring all these beautiful flowers and trees and birds, if it was such the case now. And those are what are your perceptual filters, okay? Now, I'll bring up a point that was troublesome last period, especially for Mr. Evans. The picture of the dolphins.
Oh, those two naked people, man.
What's the filter being applied there? Why do some people see dolphins and some people see the two naked people man, as Mr. Evans just pointed out? The filter there was age, right? Our age filters our perception there, okay? The younger children have the age and the experience level that does not see it, quote, in the way that, say, Mr. Evans does, clearly. He has some children, so, you know. So age is a filter. Do you guys think gender is a filter of perception? Do you think that girls see, hear, taste some stuff different than boys? Do you think cultural heritage is a filter of perception? Do you think your Korean heritage makes you see, hear, feel, taste things differently than, say, someone from a different cultural background? Do you think there's any credence to that? Do you think that those are filters that actually would affect perception? And if so, can you think of another one? What would be another filter? Well, you know what filters are, right? Like when I made the coffee in the morning, the water went through the coffee filter. Or if you think about, if any of you have ever worked a spotlight, right? You can put these things in front of it that can change the color of the spotlight. Those are filters, right? They filter things out or they filter things in. So we've already talked about a couple: interest, mood, intensity, age, possibly cultural heritage, possibly gender. There could be all kinds of these filters that you could put or take out of place to affect the way that you perceive things. I think it's an important thing to think about, is what filters are we using when we perceive the world? So your family buys a new car, and you driving around might all of a sudden notice, hey, look, there's a car like ours. Hey, look, there's my car again. Whereas 3 weeks before that, when you were driving around, you wouldn't have noticed those cars, right? You buy a brand new, gorgeous jacket, and you walk into Polo Park, and you see somebody with the same jacket. Whereas 2 weeks earlier, you wouldn't have cared about that person. But now, that has drawn your perception, okay? When a woman becomes pregnant, she'll notice pregnant women everywhere. I know when my wife was pregnant, she would instantly, hey, look, that woman's pregnant too. I remember when I was buying a house, I would notice those for sale signs everywhere as I was driving around, because I was all in tune with the idea of buying a house. So that's a filter, is that kind of stuff. All the time, we'll filter stuff. How about emotion? What about love? If you're in love, do you think that affects the way you perceive stuff? Look at more girls? Is that what you said? I'm not sure if that's love here. But anyways, so you might unconsciously see all kinds of beautiful qualities in someone when you're in love with them. Like, oh, you know, he is so tall, and oh, he's so good looking. But then all of a sudden, when you fall out of love or have the big breakup, what do you perceive? What an idiot. He is the ugliest guy. What was I thinking? He's so short, right? Your perceptional filters have totally changed. Now, did you actually see him differently, or was this a process of the brain, right? This is a process of the filtering process going on there, affected by mood and things like that. And I think it's true. I think we all have those filters. And it's important to acknowledge them, right? That's one of the things, again, we're trying to do with TOK is step back and really analyze critically what we're drawing in here. Okay, excellent work, kids. Let's now start this next piece.